Welcome back, Poggers, to the Pog State. I am Valdes, and I will be your host today. Atlas was very friendly and decided to let me host here on one of the last episodes. Thank you so much, Atlas. I am here joined by, of course, Chronicler and Wolf, and we are going to be talking mostly about the playoffs for this episode. And it is a pretty interesting playoffs that we do have this time around. Feels like everything is pretty even, actually, this time around, even with Gen G and their dominance. What are your guys' initial thoughts on that?
Well, Gen G is still the front runner, but especially with how the last few weeks have turned out, it is really hard to call, except DRX. No one has any hope. I'm sorry, guys. It's not happening. But anyone else, I think is you can make an argument for why they'd be able to make a deep run. And I don't think we've had that. Or we had that idea a couple of weeks ago. If you asked me at week 6, I wouldn't have really believed.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm just really happy that we have a playoff bracket that looks interesting and doesn't look predetermined, because the last few seasons it has felt pretty cut and dry. We know that it's going to be Damwon versus Gen G in the finals in 2021. We're like, yeah, that's where it's going. It was a bit of an upset with T1, of course, making that resurgence in summer, but by the time we got to the bracket, we pretty much knew that was how it was going to be. And then last season, Damwon was an almost comeback there in the semifinals, but couldn't actually get it done. So it's been a while since we've looked at a top 4. And again, not top 4 in the standings, but Liv Sandbox and KT looking like 3 and 4, depending on which one you want to put under the 3. It's very close. It really does feel exciting because these two teams might be able to take out T1. I think that's the more weak opponent of the two in the semifinals. Maybe even take a few games off Gen G, have a 5-game series there. Could even see an upset. And that's very exciting because it's very rare. Usually we have kind of a very top echelon of teams. That's why people jokingly say 1-team region, 2-team region. Now maybe a 4-team region? Are we getting up to 4? I'm hoping so.
I feel like maybe it's either 1-team region or it's 4-team region now. There's no in between, really. So, we did have some initial thoughts on this playoffs bracket, right? So, coming into the season, I can personally say this is not what I expected. I thought, maybe Fred Brian would be back up there, but especially the strength of some of the teams in this one, I think is definitely impressing a lot of people, especially KT and Liv Sandbox, and the fact that they are coming up in a big way and essentially are just a lot stronger than we originally imagined. So what do you guys think about the playoffs bracket that we have this time around, and was this kind of what you were expecting coming into the season?
I mean, definitely not coming into the season. I didn't expect that we'd have KT and Liv Sandbox necessarily. I mean, one of them maybe you could see in playoffs, especially Sandbox. I could see with Prince coming back. After the first few weeks, he was doing very well, and we were like, wow, it's different Liv Sandbox. Feels like old Liv Sandbox. Maybe they could make playoffs. That was kind of the original thought. KT, that's a bridge too far. To have both of them in playoffs, I think is not something anyone would have predicted. In terms of where they are in the playoff bracket, I think it's pretty reasonable, because their turnaround was so late into the season, and their Sandbox's consistency, let's say, it was pretty late in the season. They were kind of up and down across the board, so it's not really surprising that they're not in round 2 with the dominant performance we saw from T1 and Gen G. But I really do like how the bracket shapes up, because it kind of feels like an appetizer and one more proving ground for KT and Liv Sandbox, because they are, I think, more so than Gen G could be stronger than whoever they face. They are much stronger in terms of, there's a wider gap between Liv Sandbox and their opponent DRX, KT, Damwon, Key. I think the gaps between the first round matches are even higher than what it will look like when we get to the semifinals. So I'm glad it's in that order and not super close match into, okay, whoever wins doesn't matter. They're just going to get stomped in the semis.
Yeah, I agree. I'm still waiting for the collapse of Liv Sandbox. I still don't truly believe that they made it to playoffs, and it's just it's not happening. And I think that's really exciting. I'd also been pretty late to the KT train, but at this point, I am also fully on board with that. And I am really happy to see that both those teams really have showcased a growth throughout the year. And in case of both teams, you can argue that Vikla coming in, even though he came in end of spring, and then Prince coming in this summer were really big catalysts to that. I think that what made those teams strong just got more pronounced. So like it really is the development of of those two teams as like a whole and like finding their own identity and really pushing it very far that has made them very, very exciting to see. I think KT, even though they're fifth in the standings right now, in most people's mind would be at least in the same category as Sandbox. Obviously, I'm still going to lean towards Sandbox. But I think that those two are relatively close. Damwon right now, it's going to be a dark horse where I think that Damwon is like the kind of the hipster pick, and the DRX is the I truly believe in miracles pick. But like with Damwon, I can see an arc where in hindsight we'd be like, yeah, okay, so they found their identity and like it's best of fives and they have some really good drafts. I don't expect that to happen, but I think that is something that is reasonable to, in hindsight, you'd be like, oh yeah, we could maybe see that. But Sandbox and KT they're just good teams. Like they have good identities, they have a very clear idea of what they want to do in the draft, and they've taken games of mostly T1. Obviously, with Sandbox beating them, KT always having very competitive series, and then Gen G KT was very close as well. And even though last time Gen G and Sandbox faced, it was a 2-0, is still I think that first game was like one of the highlight games of the split. Super back and forth. So yeah, outside of DRX, which again, very sorry for that, Atlas. I know that you feel very strongly about this. I'm loving the playoffs bracket. I think it's a very good representation, even though T1 has faltered a little bit with yesterday's like super decisive win, and the fact that this team in I think best of fives is still going to be a menace. Really representative of the team's strengths.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, based on what you guys said, to see what we have here for this playoffs bracket. We also had Kwangdong Freaks not making it. I think with their roster, we all kind of had hopes, and they did make it last time, that they would maybe make it in summer. But summers are always different. KT, I think, is holding on to the biggest summer meme, where they always have their fans come down and they say, summer is KT. KT and summer are the same thing, and, summers for KT are always stronger. This time around, they actually look really strong going into playoffs, so I think it really buffers that meme. That's going to benefit that meme a lot. And it's just really cool to see them doing well. I think certainly for me, one of the biggest surprises was Damwon just kind of falling off a cliff, because if you look at their roster, it's kind of like a higher tier version of what happened to Nongshim. It's like, okay, you guys have an insane roster. Why aren't you performing at an insanely high level? Because that's what happened to Nongshim. They only won 4 games the entire split so far. Of course, this is done before the Sunday games on the last day of the regular season. So the fact that Nongshim weren't able to do it, but the same for Damwon Kia. They have Nugri, they have Duckdom and Kellen that looked incredibly strong on Nongshim last year, and of course the 2 key pieces of the puzzle, which is Showmaker and Canyon. So why are they not doing well? You guys have any thoughts about why maybe they're not reaching the same level? Because I'm sure there's going to be some casual viewers that only tune in for the playoffs and they're like, why aren't Damwon Kia why aren't they the best? Like, why aren't they in semis? What happened to them? Why are they in 6th, or not 6th, but 5th place, 4th place,
Yeah.
Why are they there?
They saw the Canyon highlight reel and they're like, oh yeah, he's been doing this every week, right? It's like,
yeah.
No.
That was my favorite thing, actually, about the Canyon insect moment, is that there were so many people who I saw in comments online who were like, oh yeah, I mean, Canyon is still just the best jungler. Like, there's no doubt. Like, I don't even watch LPL. I don't watch LCK at all, but like, I saw this one moment, and he won a while ago. He was MVP. Like, he definitely is the best jungler because of this one moment. And he is not a top 3 jungler in the LCK at the moment, unfortunately. But Mal was going to answer first. I guess
I'm there with you. I don't even know if he's top half.
Yeah,
which is for Showmaker. His springs have always been kind of a meme, and I don't even think that his spring was like horrible this time around. As we remember, they were able to get pretty close. But it's a combination of like they have never really found an identity that worked for them. The best they look is playing stronger side towards bot and then putting Nuguri and Sejuani, and then even then like they're kind of dependent on Canyon Showmaker actually showing up. Just hasn't really been the case. Like I think in Canyon's case for summer it's way worse than Showmaker. Showmaker at least has had some moments. Canyon's best game of the split doesn't exist anymore. As a result, the team just looks a little disjointed. They don't really seem to know like how they want to play, how they want to draft. So if you then have players that are really, really good, you can kind of offset that by just hand stiffing everyone, but they're not doing that either. So as a result, teams just not that good. It's just not really meshing. It's just not really clicking together. It reminds me of some of the T1 lineups that we've had in the past where you're like, on paper, these pieces should work, but it just doesn't really come together.
Yeah, I think the argument for putting Bible back in and having a stronger shot caller, I liked it a lot, and the timeline was so tight because there's only at the time when he was subbed in, it was the second to last week of regular season, and there's only so much time you could develop this player in your main roster, even if they had maybe been scrimming with him a little bit, but doesn't seem too likely. And maybe we were wrong, or I was wrong. I thought he was going to be a mainstay, and they were going to try to be like, all right, we're going to have to change our view of the game, but we're going to use this strong shot calling player who's really good at engaged supports. We're going to pull it into playoffs, and then use playoffs even as development for Worlds, because they were pretty much guaranteed Worlds. And now they swap back to Kellen. I think the support role has kind of secretly been, under the radar, one of the most important roles this season. I think the biggest issues that both Nongshim and Kwangdong faced this season was the inconsistency of supports. We saw Hoyt and Moam constantly swapping in and out. Peter, Effort, Snowflower. And I think that with a solid roster all around, with a weak support player, it really hurts your ability to be playmakers if you don't have a strong engage or setup or shot caller in that position. And it's really sad to me that Damwon is faltering even in the 12-14 meta, because it seems to be so much based on prio and how much you can control lanes, which is 2021 Damwon Kia to a T, always getting the prio lanes. Lucian, Showmaker every game. Every game, Showmaker gets prio. Every game they have control of lanes. Canyon and Showmaker just dominating. It's just not working out for them. They aren't finding that same sort of control over lanes. Kellen and Duckdom, late game team fights has been fine, but in the laning phase, not so much. They haven't had that same sort of control, and Nuguri hasn't been as strong of an identity as Khan was. Like, going back all the way to Khan was always either playing really strong side, or he was playing a really strong weak side, and his play on tanks or aggressive champions was very defined. I think Nuguri is, when he's supposed to be playing weak side, he's still got the highest forward percentage and is often getting solo killed because he's overextending when he should be playing defensively. And vice versa, when he's playing stronger champions, somebody's just playing a little bit timid. The roster just as a whole hasn't come together, and historically with super teams like this, it's not as super of a super team as Gen G, but historically if it doesn't work out, it splits up and we start over. I hope that doesn't happen, actually, and I hope we get another year of this Damwon Kia roster or some variation of it, so we could see that maybe one day that development will pay off and we will see this team come together like they did in the past.
Yeah, I would like to see Bible back. I think that, as you mentioned, Wolf, I think it's a little bit too little too late, Like, if he got a chance earlier, might have been nice to see what he could do, because the guy, like, came into his first game of LCK and he's, like, screaming at everyone in a good way, like, saying where to go, what to do, I'm going in, and that's the kind of shot calling you need for this. Atlas, do you have any other thoughts about Damwon Kia and their run here in summer?
Hello, yes. Bear Atlas here. Damwon. So I made the prediction of Damwon over T1 because I thought that it was time for Damwon to actually stop playing relatively poorly and start playing well. And they decided that instead they wouldn't do that. So I think that it's absolutely true. I think that they just haven't met their potential. They haven't managed to figure it out yet, and it's just not going to be the year of Damwon. Sad truth.
Other than that, there has been one other big game changer of a team here in summer. It has been, of course, Gen G, and the fact that they have already broken one record in terms of the game score, plus 30, the highest we've ever had in the LCK. Certainly, a lot of people coming into summer, or even this year, had a lot of hope for this roster. Gen G fans hoping that this would be the roster that would take down T1 and take over the pedestal. And it kind of feels like they have now at the end of summer. So, did you guys expect this eventually to come through for summer, or do you just think that, finally it's all come together for them?
Yeah, I didn't really expect it to work out as well after spring. Because T1, even with the issues that they faced at MSI, I thought still had such a solid core that they should have been able to kind of maintain that going in. And I expected a dip initially, but not only did T1 kind of power down, where we see their bot lane only like in yesterday's matches looking a little better again, and there's like some moments, but overall really felt like it was just Zeus and Owner with some assistance of Faker like desperately trying to keep everything together for most of the split, and then even them kind of cracking at the end. We saw Zeus have a couple of mediocre series back to back by the end of it, whereas Gen G, like, they didn't go to MSI. They didn't go. They like Ruler explicitly said no to Asia Games, which didn't end up mattering. But and to focus on his synergy with Lance, to focus on the bot lane, to focus on his team, to focus on Gen G, and my God, has it paid off? Like, it is unreal how dominant this team has been, and overall they are just looking, barring top lane, so far ahead of everyone in every single metric. It really is like one of those teams where you can always, after the game, go like into the red for like, can't believe they didn't ban this, because there's 15 champions that you need to ban, because can't give Singed, can't give Poppy, can't give Ari, can't give Azir. Like, it's just too much. Like, they're playing so monstrously well that it is different to the Gen G of past, where they did well in the regular split. Like, this is, I think, another level of dominance, and hopefully means that they won't collapse in playoffs.
I think individually, both Doran and Chovy already showed their improvements and their ability to play with a stronger team in spring. Like, we saw Doran move from KT, and then he's on a stronger team. He looks happier just in general. He's playing better. Chovy played better all around, but also his decision-making looked stronger on the team, even as far back as spring. But I think it's a meta where both Chovy and Ruler have a lot of power individually in this meta, where you can actually dictate how fights go, as Chovy on Ari, on Azir, where you're either chunking away at the enemy team or you're actually just setting up an Emperor's Divide engage. And for Ruler, he's been on champions like Kalista, where it's all about him. Like, I am just going to crush this lane so hard, the rest of the map doesn't even matter. Or he's on Zeri, so the game is in the opposite way, all about him. I'm going to carry this team fight. I'm going to set up with the extendo beam. I'm going to get slows. We're going to collapse on them. I'm going to do a bajillion damage. Or he's playing Lucian. He's like, I'm going to threaten their carry. I'm going to threaten their front line. I'm going to Gale Force forward. I'm going to kill somebody. Ruler has had so much agency in this meta that for me, he is showing his strengths more than he has in the past. Like when it was a Jinx Aphelios meta in spring, where he's like, I need my team to set me up to get that reset on Jinx. I need my team to do this for me. I need my team to frontline for me. I need my team to do this for me. He's like, no, I'm doing it now. I'm actually setting things up. I'm getting the lane pro. I'm getting the advantages. And so I think that Ruler in this meta has so much power as a player. The rest of the team has also upgraded, but I think Ruler is really a standout player for me in this meta because he's given so much control over what he wants to do and what the team is going to do around him, rather than kind of having to wait for them to set him up. And the team looks stronger as a result. I think, I don't want to call Ruler a selfish player, but, you know, in the past he'd always suck up all the CS.
He makes the game about him.
Yeah. He would always suck up all the CS. He would always be yelling for the penta, it's mine, like, please set me up. You could see his frustration when, like, his teammates didn't set him up in a team fight properly when he was playing, you know, those Jinx Aphelios type 80 carries in the past, the Ezreal. But now it's like, he doesn't have to rely on his team. He can make the plays with his team at the same time. And I think that's huge for him.
He also doesn't get caught anymore in his pattern Ruler spot where you throw like 400 CS into a Jinx and then he dies.
Helps that he's not playing Jinx, right?
Well, yeah, I agree, but I think that it's just, again, a testament to what Wolf was saying, like his overall level of play has been absolutely stellar. And it was really, for me, going back to like Gen G and T1, because that is, shocker, probably going to be the big story of playoffs. Barring some, well, I mean, I think there's odds for other teams, but I'd still say that is the expectation for most people. It really was between Zeus and Ruler, and I think in these last couple of weeks we've seen that as well as a split as Zeus had, Ruler as season MVP, I think is kind of it's on its way, right? Like already in terms of puck points, he is tied with Prince, but when it comes to like the overall biggest impact, it will probably end up being him.
Yeah. One thing I would say about Genji is that I think, sometimes the fans, they have a little bit too much copium, and they're like, this loss it's gonna power us up to the next level. But I actually feel like in this case, the fact that Genji lost in spring and they come into summer with a even more determined attitude has really helped everybody reach the next level. Like, they already had the talent, it was obvious, but they don't win spring. It's devastating. T1 are able to take the win once again, and they go on, and they have their undefeated run in spring, and they go on to MSI and stuff. So Genji, they're like, we're better than this. We should have been able to reach that spot. So also to your point, Mao, like, it just feels like they have champion oceans, but this is what happens to every super dominant team. It happened to T1 in spring. It happened to Damwon in the past. It's like, what are you going to ban against Canyon, like Nidalee and Stalia and this and everything else? And like, it's just that they look so good on so many different champions because they're playing so good across the board. And that's just kind of what happens, with super teams.
There's also the fact that in the current meta, and Sandbox is another testament, is top lane doesn't matter. So like the one weak point, and I think I agree with Wolf, like Doran has been playing way better over the course of this year, but he is the weak point. Like, he's the weakest player on the team, but like, who cares? It's top lane. Doesn't matter. If Dove can be on a third place team, and that in turn also means that when you talk about T1, like, that is unfortunate for them, because I still feel like Zeus and Owner, like that top half of the map is probably the strong point, but it doesn't matter as much as how well your bot laner is playing, and well,
yeah. And, just as a last point, I do feel like the meta, we talked about it last Pog State episode, but like, now this meta is kind of it's being shaped into what we thought, and the lanes matter a lot more, and the insane laning power out of Genji is, I think, just going to potentially carry them over the line. Atlas, you've had to bear with us talking a lot about our thoughts, but what did you think about Genji?
I think Genji kind of went on exactly the road that we expected for them. Spring was about getting the team shipshape. They made it to the final and were pretty competitive, to be perfectly honest, although T1 were definitely the better team on the day. And now in the summer season, it feels like they've actually found the form that we all knew that they were capable of, and the synergy is now there. They're looking like they're on an absolute tear. I think Peanut stands out to me as the player that has definitely gone above and beyond what we had grown to expect from him, right? Not necessarily having the most consistent of a run on Nongshim, also an LGD before that as well. So really good to see that Genji are finally living up to their form, and I think that they are clear favorites, as you guys do as well.
So we do have, of course, round 1 on the way of playoffs coming next week. The matches today on Sunday will not affect anything. DRX are locked into 6th place. It's just the way it's going to be. And we've had a lot of predictions, of course, with the addition of the pregame, kind of the countdown here on the LCK on the Analyst Carpet Space. We've done a lot of predictions. We'll get into that a little bit later as well for the regular season, but it's just about time now with playoffs on the way, with round 1 on the way, to make our predictions for this one. So we do have our 2 matchups, which we could probably get on screen. Live Sandbox up against DRX, and KT up against Damwon Kia. What are your guys' thought coming into this one, especially now that we are moving into best of 5s?
I think this both of these matches are very likely to be 3-0s, and I think that it's going to be Live Sandbox and KT taking the series because their form is right now way better. Despite Damwon Kia technically being a higher seed than KT, the gap is so huge between those teams, it's almost criminal that Damwon has the higher seed. And that will, of course, give them a small advantage going into the series that they wouldn't have otherwise had, which might help them. But overall, I think even in a best of 5, if the games are going to be as one-sided as I expect, after game 1 and game 2, like, the fact that it's game 3 that you have to play after losing 2 crushing victories, again, that's the expectation. I think game 3 might even be the worst one of both of these series. Now, that being said, Damwon Kia in particular, I think there is no hope for DRX, as Chronicler has kind of been alluding to. That being said, Damwon Kia have a wide variety of champions they've kind of shown us here and there, like the Karthus pick we saw a few weeks ago. And maybe they have a specific plan in mind for KT Rolster, whose playstyle is, right now very much dominating the solo lane, especially the top side. And maybe Damwon Kia has a sick plan for one game, so maybe there is like the one awesome Damwon Kia game where they have a really cool draft they can definitely not use twice in the best of 5, but they will get that one really awesome draft. Maybe that could happen. But otherwise, I think KT don't even have to show anything, and they will just keep playing the same way they have the last few weeks, and they will win. And DRX is just too many tiers below Live Sandbox right now. I don't think they have a chance of taking a single game.
Yeah, I'd echo most of that. I think the Sandbox DRX game, unfortunately, because we haven't really talked about DRX at all, because their top side is just so much weaker. It really feels like it's sometimes Deft and Barrel and generally just Zeka, who it's like Rascal lost split, but they made playoffs this time around. Where it's just like one player does really well, and outside of that, the team just doesn't have that much going on. So I don't expect that to be close. I actually do think that DK KT will be close. I expect it to go to KT in the end, but Damwon to me feel like a team that, even though overall their form has been relatively high and low, I think that this roster still will perform well. In like on a given day, you need to make this work. Looking at, for example, the series that they played against Gen.G, but I also don't think that they'll have the consistency to actually get a win. Like actually get the series win and actually pull through, because individually the performances have just been too shaky. Damwon would be my pick. Like if someone makes a deep run that we don't really expect to like make it to finals, it's probably still Damwon over KT and Sandbox, but that might also be, putting too much faith in the fact that it's a team that has done this in the past, and a team that, to me, they really feel like RG2, where it's like, can you ever really count them out? Yeah. And reasonably, I don't think that they should win. I agree with Wolf that right now KT should be, in terms of power ranking, should be 4th over Damwon. But I think that will be a fun round 1 match. I think the other one will not be fun, and it will just be Sandbox kind of dunking on DRX, unfortunately, as even the best parts of DRX don't match up that well. Like, I think Zeka is maybe ahead of Closer, but it doesn't really matter because Closer is still pretty close, and the rest of the team is just miles. Like jungle and bot lane performances it's an astronomical difference, and the skirmishing, which is very important in the current meta, like DRX just doesn't do that very well. So
they
I
don't.
No, so I don't
generally.
No, so I don't think that one is going to be even remotely close.
I think it's really easy to draft against DRX in this meta. You just take away Def's Kalista and you're like, okay, Zeka's not going to get prio. He doesn't play like that. And then Kingen is just going to play a tank topside. And
in Zeka's defense, he also doesn't have a jungler. Like that it's just
still kills it on Ahri. And mostly Ahri, but
you need to have 2 lanes. I think is DRX where you can find an angle, and they don't have that. And Pioshik can be like, oh, we got 1.5. I could fix it, but I mean, unfortunately, his form hasn't been that great. Pioshik is, for me, the most disappointing part of DRX because his form has been like this all season long. Pioshik has either looked like maybe he's, punching the ceiling and almost up there with Owner and Peanut in terms of his performances individually. Sometimes he's really hitting it. But sometimes he's over there with the Elims and the Umpties of the world and hasn't been finding the same sort of success. And what Pioshik we see on the day, I think, will really affect how DRX will perform.
Yeah, I think that's going to matter a lot. And speaking to DRX, and their potential, obviously I'm kind of on the Live Sandbox train as well. I think that if you look this dominant, it's a lot like Gen.G, where it's like, okay, you're just bopping people on the head. Like, you're just really good. You're probably going to win. But it is an interesting story of like a bit of lack of experience on the side of Live Sandbox versus some of the most experienced guys on the side of DRX, right? Because not only do you have Def, but you have Beryl, who's a world champion. You have Zeka, who, not really, not him. But he's been playing a little bit, but not nearly as much as the other guys. Pioshik and Kingen have been around for a good while. They have experience in best of 5s and stuff like this. Live Sandbox, before this season, have they made playoffs? I mean, did they once? Maybe in 6th? No,
No.
Like I think they, yeah, like
don't
when-
think so.
No, I think when they came into the league, like in 2018,
Once?
2019.
Yeah, not
once,
Live Sandbox,
but
but Sandbox
Gaming.
Gaming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the current iteration
like a totally different team.
had a great shot last year, and then they didn't make it because of the Croco and Summit incident. So no, they didn't.
So, just speaking to that, I'm not calling for the collapse of Lip Sandbox. I think they are going to win, but there is an angle. Like, if you're a DRX fan, it's like, who knows? Maybe if game 1 and the meta we're in, it's like very snowball-y. Like, what if Live Sandbox are caught sleeping and DRX win game 1? Like, how are they going to handle that? Like, I hope it's in a good way, because if it's not, I don't think that's good either for the LCK. I think if our third place team comes in and just totally, just super underperforms and does not look good and looks very inexperienced and can't handle the pressure, that's not a good look. So I hope they come in with, at least some plans for how they can handle the best of 5, because DRX have been here a million times before.
Deft might play his last professional games in that best of 5.
Yeah.
It is really hard to even wrap my head around that. And we've talked about so much of everything else. We've talked about his experience as a player. We talked about the meta, but as you were kind of going into the experience angle there, I just, kind of suddenly realized again, like, this might be, on the 17th of August.
Well,
like
they have
Deft-
the gauntlet as well, right?
That's true. That is true. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, there's still hope.
Oh, there's more.
Oh,
games
God.
left.
Thank God.
There's more
All right.
Deft.
Because I was like, hoo-hoo.
He made it last time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that will be his last chance to get an LCK title, though, is the season, and it'll be his last playoffs, of course, of the LCK. So hope he at least has a good game, a set of games.
It's like the end of an era. We don't talk about Legacy and Kings as much
Yeah.
in the LCK, but Def to me is still, over the period of time, like the dominance that he's shown, I think the greatest AD carry of all time. Even though like he's never won a Worlds, just the amount of relevancy that he's had across different metas, across different teams, different regions is mind-blowing. And thinking that, barring the gauntlet, that might be a bit of an underwhelming swan song is, not everyone can be Khan and fail spectacularly in one last Worlds final.
Shebang. Yeah.
Yeah.
One last Yasuo top.
Oh, don't remind us, Wolf.
Oh, no. Yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on, maybe DRX has an angle there. In terms of DK versus KT, I don't want to go too far on it, but yeah, I mean, DK, similar idea. They have tons of experience. Canyon and Showmaker, maybe they pull something out of the hat and they totally get an upset. KT certainly the favorites based on the form here at the end of the split. And they should win, but I also think it'll be a little bit closer. Maybe like a 3-1. Final predictions for round 1. What do you guys have in terms of numbers for these two matches?
3-0, 3-0. I'll just say it once again. Like,
Yeah.
you got more time to talk. There you go.
No, I don't need that much. I think it's a 3-0, and it's let's say 3-1 for KT. I'm not gonna. No, you know what? I think it's a 3-2. I think that one's actually gonna go all the way, and I think it'll be a really good round 1 matchup.
Okay. I'll go 3-0, 3-0 as well. I was thinking maybe the 3-1 for KT, but yeah, I don't know. I think they have pieces of the puzzle as well. Like, as long as Vikla doesn't, go up in flames and disappear, like, I think they should be pretty strong.
Always does. That's the secret.
That's his magic trick. Atlas, what do you think for predictions?
Boringly enough, boys, I am 3-0, 3-0 as well. I think there's absolutely no chance DRX takes a game, even in anyone's wildest dreams. And one of those people is me, and it makes me very sad to say so, but I think that the DRX dream is officially over. Sheds a single bear-like tear. But the second series, I think, is actually quite interesting because either KT 3-0s, like we all expect, I'm also predicting a 3-0 for KT, or we get the proof that Damwon Kia have actually just been sandbagging this entire time. They knew that they were going to be able to get a decent seed in playoffs because of their round 1, and therefore they don't necessarily need to show anything throughout the remainder of the summer season and come into this playoffs and absolutely destroy. If they do that, then it will be a 3-0 as well. It'll just be Darmon's way, and I think that that is highly unlikely, and I've been on the Darmon copium way too much throughout this season, and so I'm going to stop here.
But yeah, that's round one. Pretty interesting stuff. I think a lot of us are expecting it to be pretty one-sided, but there are pretty interesting dark horse stories for if, the teams that are not the favorites do come back. So I think that's pretty exciting as well, even though on paper it doesn't feel like it should happen. But I think that the real meat of this playoffs could definitely be in round two, because not only do we have Gen G and T1, but also we have two huge challengers in what we expect to be Live Sandbox and KT making it out of round one. And I'll just say what I said on the cast right away. I think that if you're Gen G, you're avoiding Live Sandbox like the plague. They had two good matchups against them recently, but just like Gen G are getting stronger with this meta, I think that Live Sandbox are getting even stronger with this meta. KT are as well, but I don't think quite in the same amount as Live Sandbox. And that would just be my opinion. I think that KT out of the two seem weaker on paper from what we've seen. So just my initial thoughts. What did you guys think about this potential round two?
So I think Gen G is going to pick Sandbox because I think, I think provided that Sandbox that makes it through. So if it's Sandbox KT, I think they go Sandbox. And if it's somehow Sandbox Damwon, then they avoid Damwon even more, because we've seen that matchup, no matter what the state of the teams is always close. It's like just one of those matchups that never fails to deliver. Because I think that if you look at how these two teams play, there is a lot of similarities. And I think you'd rather squash Live Sandbox coming in the round whenever you have the opportunity to. I think if you go for KT and Sandbox do somehow, they beat T1 in the best of three recently, very, very convincingly. I think they build up more steam, and I think Sandbox is a very momentum-based team. They always have been. It shows in a lot of ways. And a Sandbox in finals, I think I'd be more afraid of than a Sandbox who, for all we know, might even have a shaky series against DRX. I think that with how well Gen G has played, they do what Sandbox does, but better, right? Like Peanut is more consistent than Croco. Closer has been very good, but into a lot of the mids that Chovy will play, you can either pick away the Ahri, obviously, because Gen G has been so incredibly good on that, or you can prioritize a Nazir, and then Closer, if you pick something like an Akali or a Sylas, will actually get punished in lane, because, again, it's Chovy. And then, as a result, the only way for Sandbox to then have an in that game would be either 3v3 skirmishes, which, actually, based on the KT series, I'm like, I don't know how happy Gen G is going to be taking those. So, you know what? Actually, given that, I'm gonna go back, because the more I talk, the more I'm like, maybe they will just pick KT, even though that series was close. I think Gen G made a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes, and maybe just steer clear of Sandbox. Actually, with you, Valdes, you were right all along.
I was about to say that I'm on the same page as you about pretty much everything, and it's going to add some extra thoughts. I think Gen G picks Sandbox. Now you've switched back, so I'm going to say I was on the same page with your first instinct.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. All I have to do is say two player names, and I think you guys know what I'm going to say. Rascal and Doran. And I think that is why Gen G will probably not pick KT Rolster. This is the one angle of attack that KT abused in their series against Live Sandbox, have tried to abuse in all of their last few series. In their series against Gen G yesterday, at the time of recording, it wasn't that same sort of attack plan. There was a lot more skirmishing, KT playing around the bottom side of the map a little bit more. But I don't think that best of 3 is actually indicative of what we will see if KT face off against Gen G in a best of 5. Especially because there wasn't that much to play for yesterday. And so, for me, I think, like you were saying, Live Sandbox versus Gen G does everything Sandbox does, but better. And if Doran is facing Rascal, feels like a liability. Doran is facing Dove, it's no problem. That should be okay. And Chovy versus Vikla, they both play very similar, right? And they have very similar champion pools. Chovy has been way better than he has, but they're very similar. And Chovy versus Closer feels like, I think I just don't feel like there's any angle for Closer to win that matchup. Vikla, I could see Chovy overextending, maybe making a mistake in lane. We saw that yesterday as well. And for me as Gen G, I'm like, I never want to play KT in this case. And I think also this is a little bit unfortunate for T1 because all year long, KT has kind of had T1's number. They haven't won any regular season series, but all of them have been very close, and KT has had advantages in 3 of the 4. And arguably, if they had played those games out perfectly, probably would have a winning record against T1 this season or this year in regular season matches. So T1 is probably like, I hope they pick KT. Because on the opposite side, I kind of feel like T1 has a better chance against Live Sandbox as well.
That's actually interesting. I actually think it's the opposite, and you pick KT so that Live Sandbox can snipe T1 for you, right? Like that actually be my argument. I think that if you would go with the Gen G picks KT, then it's like we can deal with KT because top lane doesn't matter. So your one angle of attack is like, Like I agree with you. Like Rascal, I think is still. Barze is probably the best top laner that we have in the league at the moment in terms of like threat that he provides. Although Doran's team fighting has been good. But by picking KT, like Sandbox really dunked on T1. I think T1's strong points that we have seen are still somewhat reliant on getting good early moments so that they can play somewhat similar to Spring. And I don't think their early game right now is better than Sandbox's. So, yeah. It's really, I really like, I think there's a lot of arguments to be made for both sides. I actually think it's really hard to call, and it will depend a lot also on
the form in round 1.
How they look in round 1.
I will say that we said this on broadcast yesterday, but Chovy was on the record as saying we will 100% pick the weaker team out of the 2. Yeah. That's not too surprising. I think that's just in general the better choice. There are strategies where you can try to snipe a team early and try to get in there, but then like you run the risk. Every team, even if they have the utmost confidence in themselves, it's like, well, what if? There's always that thought in the back of your mind. It's like, what if Live Sandbox turn into the strongest team in the LCK all of a sudden and they snipe us? So even just based off of our predictions, I'm sure that the teams are somewhat similar in terms of their thoughts about the teams, and I think almost everybody would rate KT below Live Sandbox at the moment. Obviously, barring what we'll see in round 1. But I think as Gen G, regardless of strategies, I think they will just pick KT up. And I think Wolf's point about KT being strong against T1 is very valid, but also Live Sandbox looked really fantastic against them in the recent best of 3. But I think if you're T1... I think you come in with a better plan this time. It's a best of 5. You're up against a relatively inexperienced team. I think that T1 would feel pretty confident going against either of them, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because right now, on paper, some people could even go as far as to say T1 looked like the 4th best team, which I don't think I would personally have that. I'd say maybe in terms of form, they look like 3rd best behind Live Sandbox. I'm not sure how you guys feel.
I do think they're the 4th right now, based on recent form, and I don't want to read too much into it, but I feel like it's been a conversation we've had repeatedly. Like, okay, let's not read too much into the almost loss against Nongship. Let's not read too much into this 0-2 where they got totally stomped by Live Sandbox. But eventually we have to read into it. Eventually we have to be like,
we're reading into that for sure.
Because eventually we have to be like, well, we can't just ignore like, oh, T1 locked in 2nd. None of these matches matter, and T1 just don't care and they don't show up, because that's what the big copium is, right? But I will go ahead and give another prediction here. I think regardless of who T1 faces, right now at the time of this recording, I do not think T1 will win that. I do not think they're going to the finals. I think based on what we have seen on this patch and in their last few series in regular season, they are the fourth team of these top 4 that we're putting, assuming that there's no upset from Damwon or DRX. And I don't think their form is finals worthy. Now, they might turn it around. We're still so far away from that. It's going to be on the 21st, so we're like a whole week away from that now. Yeah. And I could very well be wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong, especially because I hope that a top 2 team in terms of standings will actually be able to perform in the semis very well. Like, that's how our format's supposed to work. and they're not going to have this really huge dip carry into a best of 5 there. I think it'll be close. But it's really hard for me to, as an analyst, actually say, no, I think T1's got this just based on how they did like 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, and what their form was looking like then, because it just hasn't been that dominant performance. And we got clear issues on the bottom side of the map. Faker has had a big resurgence in their last few games, even in the loss, or the game losses they took. I think Faker has looked really consistent. Zeus hasn't, actually. You know, he was on a lot of people's minds as frontrunner for MVP. He's fallen off a little bit here in the end. Maybe some nerves coming through, hard to say. Owner's not been able to make the same impact on Lee Sin because it's not as strong anymore. So I think if you look at how Liv Sandbox and KT are looking, especially on this meta, how T1's looking on this meta, on this patch, it's hard for me to predict that T1 will just be better just because they're T1 and just because these players have looked good all year. Because at the end of the day, just like Liv Sandbox falling out of playoffs many times, the finish line is where you have to be at the strongest. And unfortunately for T1, I think of these 4 teams, they are the weakest right as we're crossing it.
Yeah, I'd say that I think it really depends on what the matchups are. I take T1 over KT because based on how those 2 teams have performed over the course of the year, or over not just the split, the entire year. Like, I just don't see T1 losing a best of 5 against them. I think they will benefit more from it. But if it's Sandbox, then I take Sandbox over T1, right? And you'd probably take Genji over everyone right now, except when you're like, when you're talking about Domon again, say the Domon do make it, then I think you'd avoid Domon.
It'd be close.
Right? It'd be close again. So
I don't know.
In terms
Domon
of,
didn't look great yesterday.
well, no, I mean, like, I don't think they will make it, right? But like,
Yeah.
provided that, I think the matchups really matter in terms of overall power level. I probably put T1 and Sandbox on a similar level right now. I just think that Sandbox, their playstyle fits really well into T1 because T1 never gets to the point where they are able to play again around Gumayushi, and their top side being strong is irrelevant in the face of Dove, the god of tanks.
Yeah, I was surprised you didn't mention him earlier there in the
you have to mention at least once Pog State.
We talked about team fighters with Doran. I mean, Dove's right up there with the
well,
best
I mean,
of them.
we mean about Dove himself has also been on the record saying, like, I think I'm the best at tanks besides Zeus. I agree. I don't think Dove is a great top laner at all, but he has the one niche. It's literally the same thing that Ghost did on Damwon. It's just what the team needs. And I think that not even Zeus is going to be able to, like Zeus is better, will be better in the top lane. I don't think it's really going to matter. So it really depends on who faces who. But it's so close. It's super fun. Like, I think Genji is the only one that is, like, clearly ahead of everyone else. And Damwon is pretty far off of T1, KT, Sandbox. And then DRX is not even in running, as mentioned previously.
It's so interesting you mentioned Dove in the matchups because there has only been one player who absolutely smashed him. There's only been one player who absolutely crushed him, and it was Rascal in that series, which they did end up losing. But
yeah, but it didn't matter.
Maybe some Rascal versus Dove in the finals foreshadowing? No,
no,
I don't think so. But
I just don't think top lane's relevant. Like, Dove literally, like, dropping waves to be like, I go Dragon. My team needs me there.
Yeah.
It's really,
it's my only function.
Yeah. It's really what the meta is about right now. It's about bot side. It's about, or at least in the LCK. I know that, like, our region is really focused on the AD carries right now. So I think having a top laner that doesn't care about second waves is just there when you need him, gets you like an early Drake or two, gets you the 9% extra resistances or the extra sustain in lane, and helps you snowball is really valuable.
Well, this is when, like, the allow us to introduce ourselves Aatrox and Renekton start walking in, and they're like, I don't know, because we're seeing a little bit of resurgence of that as well on the top side of the map, and getting that top side prio to then get a turret early, lane swap is a thing you can do as well. And I as well as I do agree that Dove is the best weak side top laner in the LCK, I think that is, we're getting to a point where that's now being abused. We're, like, experimenting with abusing that. Like, we're getting to the point where maybe there are ways. The Gnar is falling out, so I don't think we're going to see, like, Lee Sin abusing Gnar as the answer. Like, we saw that one time where Rascal did beat him in lane. But we'll see, because I think Dove is a huge strong point in that regard on weak side. But it's not a given. You can't just blind pick Gragas and get away with it necessarily. You might have to ban Renekton or Aatrox. We've seen the Groggets get punished quite a bit on 12-14 so far. So that's my kind of devil's advocate against. We'll see how that matchup goes. But I think it's very exciting because I'm glad we're not just bumping tanks into each other all the time in the top lane. Still most of the time, but not all the time now.
Yeah, I think best of fives is a good plane and a good battleground for some of our top laners to give it a shot, you know. Will it matter in the series that we play? I think that's still yet to be seen. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't really. Like you were saying, Wolf, if you could really accelerate the pace and you're like, we're going Renekton Nidalee, or we're going Renekton aggressive jungler, and we're going to bop top lane, get the Rift Heralds, give up first Drake, but then really fight over the second Drake. Like, that's an angle you could go for. And it raises another point, because I think that understanding of the meta and the way that these teams play around the meta and how aggressive they get and how much they draft for prio is really going to be a big talking point when it comes to the playoffs, because especially in round 2, you know, talking about some of these matchups, like, it feels like Gen G is greater than Live Sandbox is greater than KT, and they all have a similar style, and then T1 is like a little bit slower, I think, to adjust to the meta, but I like how they brought in the Samira. It was the Samira, right?
Yeah.
Love
that
Gumi.
pick.
You see, it was like a late pick. It was a kind of hidden 80 carry pick. They're not necessarily picking for Guma early, but they're like, we're going to go all in on some of these fights, and we're going to be looking for early fights and early spikes with the shield bow. And it's them saying, okay, now we've got our own take on the meta, and I think that's really exciting as well. So we've talked a bit about this, but we do have to do predictions for round 2. Now, we don't know exactly which teams are going to make it into round 2, but let's just assume for this experiment, if you will, that Gen G go ahead and we'll do 2 iterations, I guess. Gen G versus KT and T1 versus Live Sandbox. What are your guys' predictions for those 2 matchups?
For Gen G KT, I'd say 3-0. I think that the best of 3 that we had yesterday is not going to be indicative of how that matchup is going to play out in the best of 5s. For Sandbox T1, probably 3-1 for Sandbox. I think it will be a dominant victory. I think T1's too good not to maybe find one game where they can actually really abuse the dove angle, where they're able to make use of the fact that Sandbox just always fights, even when sometimes they shouldn't. Draft into that well, but I think with the forms right now, like Sandbox to me is looking, like they should have a really good matchup in the T1.
Yeah. I have the same score predictions. I think Gen G would 3-0 KT. Unfortunately for KT, like, I think it's a better matchup for them, arguably, which is why I said earlier I don't think Gen G will pick them, but still I think Gen G is just a whole tier above, and in the best of 5, where it matters most, and Gen G are so hungry right now. So many of these players have never gotten an LCK title. This would be a back-to-back finals for them. I just don't see any way that Gen G drop the ball or don't have the proper form there. 3-0 for them, and then I completely agree as well. I think T1 could definitely, like, I only almost even say, like, I think Live Sandbox wins game 1 against T1. T1 wins game 2, and then Live Sandbox wins 3 and 4. Like, I feel like that's how it's going to go if that matchup happens. I could just see it in my head. Like, T1 lose the first game. They have really good decisions in the second game. They're coming in, like, with the right draft. Game 2 gives everybody hope. And then Liv Sandbox is like, nah. And then games 3 and 4, we're just better. They have better skirmishing. T1 lose game 3, and then it's match point for Sandbox. They're under the pressure. They crack. Liv Sandbox 3-1. Like, I'm going, like, really deep onto this, but I could just see it, like, in my mind so clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think mine are pretty similar. It's hard not to go Gen G 3-0. I think in this case, I think that's pretty fair. KT are a really strong team, but Gen G are just kind of, they're looking like a Worlds finalist contender right now, in my mind. I don't know if they'll win, but I think they'll definitely get there. So I think it's hard not to predict a 3-0 for them. I'd say I'd give an extra game to T1. I think that Liv Sandbox will still win, but a 3-2 in a close series could be the way. And in my mind, I'm like, I almost want to give T1 that edge. I'm like so close, maybe like the experience, and I really liked how they're actually showing new stuff in drafts. And I think that might be able to pull them over the edge in a best of 5. So I'm like right on the edge, but I think I just barely have to give it to Liv Sandbox. In a different universe, Valdes is saying 3-2 for T1, but not this time around, unfortunately, for T1. We'll ask Alice a little bit later. Let's do the other. Let's do the other iteration. So let's say that Gen G do pick Liv Sandbox, and they go into that one, and then
Yeah.
T1 have to go up against KT Telecom War. Atlas, we've talked a lot. What do you have to say about this one?
I will do my very best to keep this short because you guys did definitely talk for a long time. I would say that when Live Sandbox wins and KT wins, I'm going to only talk about these scenarios because I think that they are more than likely. I think Gen G chooses Live Sandbox. I think T1 are then lumped in a telecom war that is going to go to 5 games. It's going to be extraordinarily exciting and super awesome. I think that T1 will get massively invigorated from it as well, which will make for a great final. As far as the Gen G series and the reason why I think they're going to pick up Live Sandbox is because the Dove and Doran matchup shores up a weakness that Gen G have had in the past. And I think that they are just better across the rest of the map. And because Live Sandbox tend to play through the same lanes, Gen G are just better at it, and therefore it's much easier for them to win. Even if the team might feel technically like they're more strong right now. I think that KT and Live Sandbox are close enough for you to choose the stylistic side rather than choosing just for pure power and who's at the top of the standings at the end of the season. That's just my 2 cents. Not entirely sure whether it's going to happen, but I'm just a bear after all.
Pretty interesting predictions at the end of the day. So in terms of predictions, we've talked a lot about playoffs. Obviously, that's the meat of this episode, but we're nearing the end of the regular season, and we've been doing predictions every week. If you guys have been tuning into the pre-show that we've been doing for the Analyst Carpet Space every week on Wednesdays, that has been really fun to do. I'm actually glad that we got to do them, even though sometimes it can be a little bit straightforward and it's like, okay, T1, Gen G, and Live Sandbox are going to win every game, whatever. We had our fun with it, and we have the pretty much final results up until right before the final day, which is Sunday. So, so far, I'll just read them off from top to bottom. Chronicler in first with 70 points out of 90. So getting 20 wrong feels bad, man.
Might hit the the 72 because there's 2 more matches to be played.
There are 2 more matches, so
which is still not great in terms
72.
of. It's all
It's
very
like an
close.
80%.
Yeah, so I've observed some fun trends because unsurprisingly, the reason why we see what we see is, for example, Wolf got a couple of points off of believing in KT before everyone else did.
Maybe I should I read off everybody's scores?
Yeah, wait, do that
before
first.
you go?
Yeah,
Okay,
you're right.
Chronicler got first at 70. Wolf is right behind him. I would maybe even say tied for first with 69. 69 so far. Probably going to end with, unless he gets both
probably
wrong, maybe we can rig, not actually. But yeah, he's at 69 out of 90. I'm at third with 67 out of 90, and Atlas unfortunately did fall to last with 62 out of 90. He did go for some very, he was trying to make it interesting at times, and I appreciate that, because sometimes the predictions can be like, all 4 of us voted for the exact same teams the entire week.
You got to take risks.
Yeah, he took one for the team. Thank you,
did.
Atlas.
Yeah.
So, Chronicler, you were saying?
Yes. So we have some trends. Unsurprisingly, a couple of the early points, for example, that Wolf was able to gather was due to his faith in KT before anyone else did.
Yeah.
I both lost and won points by having faith in Sandbox before everyone else did, as expected. Valdes, even though in a lot of situations he did show a fair amount of faith in Dom1.
And
also,
Brian.
Yeah, when
Fred
it
Brian,
well, yeah,
yeah.
that one was a little bit hit or miss. But when Dom1 did lose, he was always on the board. So the T1 win, for example, that they got in week 2, he was the only one who found that one. So Dom1 or Valdes are very good at knowing when Dom1 was gonna lose.
Yeah. I have a really good read on Dom1.
Yeah, and then Atlas.
We're together. Also,
me?
I did stay on the Nongshim train for like 1 or 2 weeks too long. Me and Atlas got a little bit caught
so
on the
Atlas,
Nongshim train.
we all sometimes took risk. I had like a Hanwha Life that didn't work out. I think Wolf had a Fred O'Brien win that didn't pan out. So there was some risk taking there. Atlas, however, was the only one brave enough to take a risk on 2 teams because obviously he'd take risk on DRX because unsurprisingly that's always going to happen. But he also kept believing in Nongshim until they actually started winning. So it was really a case of when like you're so close to striking gold, and then
you turn around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it doesn't quite pan out. literally because you're striking gold. So Atlas is the bravest of all of us.
None of us voted for Nongshim against Live Sandbox,
Well, I don't think we should have.
which makes sense. We all voted for Live Sandbox in week 7, and we were let down. Maybe
Interestingly,
not for the last time.
you guys will know the results when you watch this episode, but Atlas and Valdes voted for Nongshim versus Kwangdong, and Chronicler and I voted for Kwangdong. So, starting to feel a little bit worried about my pred right now, to be honest.
in the last match.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
starting to feel a little bit worried about that. Obviously, it's not going to affect who wins for this episode, but
because we all voted DRX, so there can only be a difference of 1 point.
Exactly.
And both of you guys voted for the same, so you'll end up first and second regardless. Yeah, I think we're pretty much done with this episode. We talked a lot about playoffs and about all of our predictions. You guys can either laugh about us in the comments, make sure to go out on Twitter and interact with us and the Pog State on Twitter and on the YouTube comments. Always fun doing this here, and was fun. Thank you, Atlas, as well, for joining us, but giving me a chance to host for once, for the first time ever.
you did a great job.
Yeah, thank you, Atlas, for your input on this one. It was really insightful. But that's going to do it for us on the Pog State, so thank you so much for joining us once again here at the Pog State, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for letting me hang out on the show, everyone. Sorry about the crappy mic quality, as well as my voice not necessarily being up to par. I'm doing my very best to get fit and ready, and I'll be back with you hopefully sooner rather than later. I've missed everyone so much. I wish I wasn't a bear. I can't wait to be real again.